So you told us that you went to Denmark, and that's where you were able to be a great parent, and you had the time to do work-life balance the way it should be done. Right? What did you do career-wise there? We didn't really hear much about that
Well, my first few months were not work-life balanced at all, because I had been there about 3 weeks and I was working at the Danish Corrosion Centre, and everybody in Denmark speaks English, and they would ask me questions and discuss things with me in English. But sitting around the lunch table, they'd all be speaking Danish. And I sat and listened to this and thought, if I don't learn this language, I'm not going to survive. And Danish is a very difficult language to learn because they don't pronounce it. People say they're a nation of ventriloquists, and they are. And they say the first consonant and maybe the first vowel, and then they swallow the rest of the word, which makes life rather difficult. So I signed up for a course, which I didn't discover until later. Nobody signed up for, until they'd been in the country at least 2 years, and they'd already been through Berlitz and in Lingua and all the other stuff. But I signed up after a month in Denmark. And the course was taught by somebody who'd bought the rights from the US CIA. When they want to drop somebody in another country, speaking in a local area, speaking the local dialect or the local thing, they have this technique, and he had licensed that technique to teach Danish to the likes of me. So I was, in addition to working all day, I was going to class three hours, 3 times a week, and there was at least as much homework. But I was doing okay. I did okay in the course. This started in December. By Easter, my husband was saying to me, well, why aren't you talking Danish? You're sitting up in bed at night, speaking it in your sleep. And I was too scared to do that. You know what it's like? Well, come Easter, we invited a couple of people over for Easter dinner or something, and they brought Easter beer. Now, I didn't know anything about Easter beer. And during the evening, downed 3 cans of this beer and was talking non-stop Danish because the beer had 12% alcohol. And the following Tuesday, I went into work and I was speaking Danish, and I worked in Danish for the rest of the time. But you can't learn a vocabulary, a lifetime's vocabulary, in 4 months. And I remember my colleague said, there's somebody on the phone, Carolyn, who wants a consultation on a problem. I'd been there a few months, and the Danish cement company, Aalborg Portland, had devised a new recipe for a cement and got hold of the Danish Corrosion Centre to say, we'd like to give you a contract to look at whether this new cement will protect steel reinforcement just as ordinary Portland cement does. So I had the job of setting up this project, so I suddenly had to learn a lot about this coating on steel, which is generally known as cement and concrete. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out all the hydration of cement and all the things that would, whatever. One of the things that people don't understand about concrete, those home makers that are putting in their own private patio and so on, the pH of concrete is about 13. And it will dissolve the dead skin on your hands if you're playing around with it. And if you play around too much, it'll start dissolving the live skin too. pH is very caustic. pH of 13 is very caustic. And that's something to bear in mind. But we did a lot of work looking at the corrosion of steel and concrete. This started because at one point, at that time, just before I arrived in Denmark, a balcony had fallen down in Copenhagen, killing the 3 people on it. And there were 6,000 similar balconies in the city. And at the time I was there, the government in Denmark gave a contract to the Danish Corrosion Centre to monitor these. So we had people going out monitoring these 6,000 balconies. So we had quite a lot of expertise by the time we finished on that. One of the things that was interesting too I learnt Danish, but I was expected to be able to understand and speak with Norwegians and Swedes because I was on several Nordic committees. And there was one occasion I remember when we were at a meeting, there were a couple of other Danes there, and they started ridiculing me because I had mispronounced a Danish word. And the Norwegian turned around and said, yes, you're right. Carolyn doesn't speak Danish perfectly, but she speaks the only Danish the rest of us can understand, because the Danes don't pronounce it very well. To give you an example, in Sweden, the floor is golvet, G-O-L-V-E-T, pronounced golvet. The Danish equivalent is G-U-L-V-E-T, and it's pronounced gul. So you see what I mean. There was one occasion, one of the many occasions, that I had fun in Denmark. This was a different type of fun. We were wanted to buy an electron microscope from Philips in Holland. So we were supposed to fly to Amsterdam, and then from Amsterdam to, I can't remember the city that Philips is in. And I said to my boss, how about we ask my husband, who had a pilot's license, to fly us directly there, thinking it could give him some free flying time and so on. Well, my boss thought this was a wonderful idea, but thought his cousin would be better to do it. So his cousin arranged to fly us there, and I asked if he would like me to sit in the seat beside the pilot, because I had a lot of practice in visual navigation, and it was all visual. And no, my boss wanted to sit there, so I was sitting in the back. And we take off, and first of all, he hadn't filed the proper flight plan, which was a bit of a problem, but I'm watching the dials, and with a plane, you have to, the fuel tanks are in the wings, and you have to make sure they're balanced, so you switch from one to the other. And I'm watching this, and it's going down, 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 down. And eventually, I said to the pilot, who didn't know me from Adam, of course, don't you think you should switch fuel tanks? Well, this, of course, did not make me popular at all. He did switch the fuel tanks, thank goodness, because we'd have been totally out of balance. But anyway, we're flying along, and we get to what he thought was our destination. He said, oh, there's the field, the airfield, you know, we'll go down there. And I said, I don't think that's right. And the tower was not answering his calls. And I said, this is not right. So anyway, he ignored me and landed, and we were surrounded by tanks and trucks and men with guns. We were in a German military airfield. One Brit and 2 Danes. Now, Denmark was occupied by the Germans, and there's a kind of between them. They're not exactly the most, popular people, each on either side. So I was left negotiating with these Germans that we weren't really terrorists, but we were arrested, of course. And, and then they had to check up on us all. And eventually, they decided to let us go. And told me how to fly to wherever we were going in Holland, and warned us that there was an exercise going on, a flight exercise going on. So we had these fighter jets flying all over. So we had to fly very low. So we get to, we managed to miss the fighter jets. And I had suggested that I sat in the front seat and navigated, which was, I should have done in the first place. But we get to Holland, and I'm saying, there's the runway. That's not a runway, that's a field. I said, yes, it's a grass runway. No, it isn't. Anyway, I fought him, and I was, of course, right. So then I got the pleasure of sitting in the front seat and navigating on the way back to Denmark. But that was one of my interesting things. I didn't expect to get arrested in Germany, but and I had a lot of meetings in Sweden, Finland, and Norway. I travelled a lot in those countries, so it was a very interesting time, and I learned a lot about cement and concrete. And in fact, I was incredibly honoured to be given the Danish Concrete Institute's Society's top award only 4 years after I had started working on concrete. I was also elected to the equivalent of the Academy of Engineering, the Danish Academy of Technical Sciences, and I think I was the only non-Dane at that time who was elected So it was a good time, very good. Yeah. And of course I had mentors there as well.
Do you want to tell us about any of the mentors? Any of them that you'd like to share anecdotes about?
Well, I can, but they won't mean anything to the metallurgical world because they were concrete people. But, you know, some of them, Anders Henriksen was an excellent mentor. My boss, Hans Arup, was also, he was a corrosion guy, and a few others.
So where did you go after Denmark?
Canada, for a variety of personal reasons. And I became head of the department. I was hired as the head of the department, professor, full professor with tenure. Sounds wonderful. You have to remember, that's not necessarily wonderful. Everybody, including the students, assumed that the only reason I had been appointed was because I wear a skirt. And they told me so. Serendipitously, about a year afterwards, one of the students came up to me, two of the students came up and asked, we're having a debate on affirmative action versus equal opportunity, and we would like you to speak against affirmative action. Would you do that? I said, I will indeed, because, and I said, everybody thinks that I'm here because I'm in this position because I wear a skirt. And the student said, yes, we did. We don't now, but we did. So being hired, affirmative action has a lot of backlash. Equal opportunity, and basically I believe that the only reason why a woman in North America cannot take whatever profession she has is either because of money or because of her parents' culture. There is no official hindrance to a woman going into the metallurgical field or any other engineering field or any other STEM field. Everybody's falling over themselves backwards to increase those numbers. So, but don't do it too much because you might find yourself in the position I was in.
Any good anecdotes on comedic relief that you had during that first year as a chair in Canada? To help you kind of deal with the stress?
Comedic. I was shocked to find when I sat down at the department meeting that the men were referring to each other by Professor this or Professor that. And I looked at them and said, what? I'm sorry, I do not want to hear Professor Smith or Professor Saimoto. Would you please use your first names? We're in this together. So that was one of the interesting aspects. And I think I mentioned, or maybe I didn't, in mentoring students, girl students, I've often given them or lent them a book called You Just Don't Understand by Debbie Tannen. If you haven't read it, I strongly recommend you do. I think I bought 10 copies and I never get them back. Her thesis is that women communicate with each other in order to build a bond. And I notice you're nodding. You're agreeing with me. Men, on the other hand, communicate in order to figure out where they are in the pecking order. I could not believe this. I must have asked well over 200 men, is that true? And only 2 have disagreed with me. The others have all said, yes, of course, so, obviously. And I'm just horrified at the thought of going through life trying to figure out where you are in the pecking order. Is this person better than me or not? So I strongly recommend that book. And I've recommended it to both men and women since then. So,
What did the book teach you? Like, besides men want to find their order?
Well, you know, yeah, well, what it taught me to understand men a lot better. I mean, here I was, head of the department with, you know, male colleagues, and I'd sit around a department meeting, and you could see the level going up like this. You know, they'd be outdoing each other. Think about sitting around and watching an American football game. The women are watching the game. The men are trying to outdo each other on the statistics of this player and that player and the other. It's everywhere. Once you realize it, it's everywhere. And excuse me, gentlemen, but it's laughable.
So what, out of your kind of long and wonderful career, have you found most rewarding and you're most proud of?
Well, obviously, I'm proud of students, the students that have trusted their education to me. Not all of them have appreciated my English sense of humour, but some of them have. And if you're teaching a class and you get one letter from a student, as I did a couple of years ago, sent me a card saying, "You haven't just made my day, you've made my life," and went on. You only need one of those. And students say, you made such a difference to me. And that is very, very humbling, actually. I regard all my graduate students as my kiddies, and I've been invited to numerous weddings and celebrations and so on. And so that's given me a lot of fulfillment. The other aspect is the network of friends I have. One of the problems, of course, is all my friends are men. And one of the difficulties is you can't suddenly ask a colleague out for lunch if he's a married man. It does make life difficult. But I have friends all over the world, all of them, 99% of whom are men. But I'm not complaining. I've had some very good friends. I've had the opportunity to work with industrial people as well as academics. And, if you wanted my opinion, I would say industry is preferable because you're not trying to do 3 jobs at once. If you're doing research, you're doing research. You might have a bit of administration on the side, but as a professor, you have to be your own market manager, your own expertise exploiter, your own archivist, your own accountant, your own everything. And in industry, you don't. So I think you can achieve a lot more in industry, not on the personal level, but on the professional level. And a lot of my students, because of the work I've been doing, a lot of my students have left after the master's degree and gone into industry. And when a company calls you and says, "Do you have any more? I'm only hiring from you." That's happened to me a couple of times. There's one other professor in the University of Toronto that said, "I'm only hiring from you and from Doug Hooton." And that's incredibly gratifying when you know that they're going out there and they're doing a good job and so on. So that's one of the big impacts I've had on industry, is providing them with people who know something about corrosion, even though they're civil engineers. There's a lot of construction that's deteriorating rapidly because of corrosion, largely because we put these darn de-icing salts on it everywhere, or stick it out in the sea. So that's one of my biggest contributions, I think, the people side.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your time at Waterloo and what all you've done there?
Yes, I mentioned that Keith Brimacombe had recommended that I apply for the vice presidentship, and I was interviewed there. That was an interesting thing, but after being interviewed, I hadn't heard for a while, and then I got a phone call offering me the position. And being me, I said, "Oh, thank you. Since I hadn't heard from you for 3 weeks, I assumed you'd offered it to somebody else." And the person at the other end, who was the vice president, the provost actually, said, "Yes, we did, but it was turned down." So I said, "Oh, and can you tell me, was the other person a white male?" And he said, "Just as a matter of fact, yes, he was." So I said, "Fine, then I'll consider the position." I didn't want them offering me a position just because I'm a woman. And then I accepted the position. In November, the end of November 95, the provincial government cut the funding to all of our universities are public, cut the funding to the universities by, I think it was 28% or something, no, 15%, effective May. The university introduced an early retirement program to deal with it. And on the 1st of January, 130 faculty members and 200 staff members announced they were taking the early retirement package. That included all my senior staff in the Office of Research and every associate provost in the university. So it ended up in the administration. There was the president, Jim Downey, the provost, Jim Colfleisch, myself, and the vice president development, Ian Lithgow, and we had no senior management underneath us. I hadn't even found the way to the ladies' room at this point, so it was a very, very difficult situation. Nobody wanted to talk about research because everybody was saying, who's going to teach the course tomorrow? You know? So it was very difficult. On the other hand, it was a fantastic job. You should take it if you get it. Because it's the one job that gives you a window on research right across the university. And you don't get that if you're on the administrative side or the VP academic or something. You're too busy with rules and regulations. But when I went there, I didn't know how you did research if you didn't have a lab. But I now know how you do research in 18th century Russian literature or economics or so on. It was fantastic. And it was great for 5 years. But I spent most of my time in meetings, chairing meetings, visiting, dealing with problems and so on. And I missed the lab. But 5 years, that was wonderful. And I strongly recommend if anybody has the opportunity to do the VP research job, take it. It broadened my perspective enormously. It really did. Oh, I did manage to graduate 3 PhDs and 2 masters while I was there. So I did manage to do that. I then went back to my teaching, and I have spent the last long life teaching predominantly first and second year mechanical engineers materials, required courses, and I've taught fourth year non-metallic materials, which is not so much fun. I have to teach polymers. And I've taught biomedical engineering students materials, and I've taught management engineering students materials, and then on the graduate side I've taught corrosion frequently, and also I developed a course on material science of cement and concrete for the civil engineers. So that's basically what I've been doing over the last couple of decades, actually. So,
what's your favorite course to teach, and why?
Probably corrosion, because I could do it standing on my head, as you can. I try not to stand on my head. However, what I do in my classes, if I'm teaching an hour-and-a-half class, I stop and say, okay, get up and stretch. And before exams, I've been lying on the floor in the classroom, teaching them how to breathe from your lower abdomen so that you can calm yourself down and things like that. They all think I'm weird, but maybe I am. One of the things you can't do is be self-conscious as a professor, so.
Constantly judged.
Oh yes. The other thing is you can't have a thin skin. Everything we do, the courses evaluate and criticize us. You send out a proposal, it's sent out for reviewers to criticize you. You send out a paper, it's sent out to reviewers to criticize you. Everybody has the right to criticize a professor and gets very upset if you criticize them. C'est la vie.
And it's your British wit that helps you deal with the life of full criticism?
Right. Oh, yes. But also, you hear students come along and say, I've got this graduate student, this paper, he says he doesn't understand that sentence. Of course it's understandable. I said, yes, you knew what you did. And if the reader can't understand it, we haven't written it properly, or you haven't written it properly. Maybe you better go back and figure it out. And I say to students, if you can't explain your research to your grandmother, you don't understand it. Of course, I'm going to be a grandmother, so that's...
One day they'll be explaining it to you.
Right. Exactly.
So can you tell me about some of your more memorable honors and awards? I know there are more than several.
I have had far too many honors and awards in considering the things I've been doing. I've just tried to do my job. But as I mentioned, I've got a number of mentors. I received the Society of Women Engineering Achievement Award in 1980. They had tried to persuade me to join that society, and I said, I'm not a woman engineer, I'm a metallurgical engineer. So what did they do? They gave me the Achievement Award, which gives me honorary membership for the rest of my life.
One way to do it.
Yes. I have been very honoured to be elected the Royal Society of Canada. And when I was elected to the Academy of Engineering, it's changed now, but at the time when I was elected to the Academy of Engineering, I think that was 1998, there were only ever 250 fellows out of the whole of Canadian engineering of all four. So it was a tremendous honour. And I think there were 2 other women at the time. So that was a great one. As I mentioned, that I was elected to the Danish Academy of Technical Sciences. And I'm a fellow of TMS. I'm a fellow of the American Concrete Institute, and I'm a fellow of the UK Institute of Materials, Minerals and Mining. I could never get those words right. My greatest honour, of course, is that I was named to the Order of Canada, which is the highest civilian award in Canada. And for that I am very proud. That's what this little badge is. And I suppose that people who read these things or see them will know John Cleese, the comedian. He was interviewed one time by the senior journalist in the CBC, and Peter Mansbridge, who also is a member of the Order of Canada. And Cleese leaned over and said, "Well, that's pretty. What is it?" So Mansbridge explained it was the Order of Canada, and he said, "Oh, where can I get one? Can I buy one?" So Cleese said, "Well, weren't you a member in the Order of the British Empire? It's the same kind of thing." And Cleese said, "Yes, well, they did offer that to me, but I couldn't figure out which empire I was supposed to be commander of, or whatever it was." So anyway, that tells you the perspective. But it was really very gracious. It's presented by the Governor-General of Canada and so on. So, and I have a big medal, by the way, on a ribbon, you know. Mm-hmm. So, but this is the one they ask you to wear. So, other than that, I'm getting an award from AIST next month. And I keep saying, stop nominating me, because with all due respect, my CV doesn't need it. I've been saying, nominate younger people for whom it can make a big difference to their career. What's the point of giving it to me? And nobody listens. So, I mean, you can ask Rusty Gray how many times I've said to him, "Don't nominate me." Hanny Heinen, "Don't nominate me." And yet, so.
They respect you too much to listen.
Well, I don't know.
I suppose. So how did you first hear about AIME and TMS and get involved?
Bert Westwood. He was very much involved with both societies. And I joined TMS in 1969. So I've been a member for a long time. I can remember the first talk I gave at TMS. It was at the Waldorf Astoria in New York. And Bert, pushed me to give the talk because it was a joint paper. And of course I was terrified. I was only about 25, maybe 26. And we get there, and first, of course, I was wearing miniskirts because that's all I had. And the speaker was up on a platform, and the projectionist was a bit lower, so he was kind of looking at, you might want to cut this, looking up at me all the time, and kind of, I'd say, "Next slide, please," and I'd get this silly grin. And what Bert had advised me, which I advised to other students, if you're scared, look beyond the back row at everybody thinks you're looking at them. And I looked up. So I'm trying not to look at the audience, which of course is all men, and look up. And the ceiling was painted with naked men, one of these Roman fresco things. So I was just completely shaken. Those are the things I don't remember what I was talking about. I just remember these awful things. That was my first talk. And they, as I think I mentioned, at the 100th anniversary of AIME in 1971, I was awarded the Robert Lansing Hardy Award for a promising metallurgist under the age of 30 for which that was my first award, and I was completely overwhelmed by it. I remember giving the president a hug, which shocked everybody when he gave me the award. But, there was another time. Bert was on the board of the, or whatever, the board of directors, I guess, and his wife couldn't go with him, so he invited me. And I can remember having the whole board running up the down escalator and down the up escalator at one point. So, take the pomposity out of everybody. One of my goals, actually, has been since I graduated, is to prick the pomposity of the male, because this business of outdoing each other really makes them rather pompous. So you're sitting around a meeting and everybody's getting up and you just put in a silly comment and it comes down to earth. So.
How has membership benefited you in your career?
Hugely. Networking, visibility. I mean, everybody loves the word outstanding. If you're a woman in metallurgy, you stand out. Why do you think I've got all these awards? It's not because I'm capable. It's because they think, it's about time a woman got the award.
But you are capable.
Yeah, well, I'm capable. I'm not brilliant, but I am a great believer that there isn't much variation about the average intellectual ability. And it's how you use that average intellectual ability. And I have tried very hard to put mine to the best use so that I don't hold other people up. So. But getting to know people, it's the society. When I was in Denmark, for 9 years, I didn't participate at all in TMS. And when I came back, my first TMS meeting, it felt like coming home.
Says a lot.
Yeah.
So do you have any ideas of attracting younger people, emerging scholars and emerging leaders in industry into corrosion and into metallurgy? What are ways to get people attracted to it?
Well, nobody's attracted to corrosion. However, do you know that poem, An Ode to Corrosion?
No.
You don't?
I don't think I do.
Oh, and I can't remember it, of course. I will get the words and I will send them to you. I remember when I gave the Acta Materialia Materials and Society Award back in 2009, I think it was. I had the whole audience reciting it. Mighty ships upon the ocean suffer greatly from corrosion. Even those that stay at dockside are rapidly becoming oxide. And it goes on from there. And then it ends up with, here's an ode to rust, no doubt about it. Most of us would starve without it. It's an ode to the corrosion engineer.
That's awesome.
It was a bunch of corrosion engineers who came up with it over a beer one night.
So as a mentor, what advice do you give to both female and male students? That might be different between them, but what advice do you give them while you're a mentor of them that you think you'd like to share with us?
Well, as I said, I tend to mother them a bit. And I talk to all of them about how they present themselves. In the men, don't be too dogmatic and assertive and what have you. And particularly, I probably spend more time on the women trying to mentor those, because most of the women who come into university are diffident, is probably the best word. And so I try to teach them to, however you're feeling, we're all actors and actresses, and to put on an act of being confident and speaking not aggressively but assertively if you know a subject. I tell my students, if you're giving a talk on work you've done, you know much more about it than your audience does. So don't be afraid. They're not going to tell you you're wrong because you know what you did. And women particularly, for example, one of the things I learned, I was told by my former PhD supervisor, reminded thereof, or pointed out by him, that when women raise their voices to speak to a large crowd, our voices tend to be shrill. It's a fact of life that we can't change. So either learn like an opera singer to sing from your diaphragm, to speak from your diaphragm, or use a microphone, because there's nothing worse than listening to shrill. Men, fortunately, don't have that problem, but they have some of the breaks, but we have others.
So, do you have any regrets regarding your career choices? Would you have done anything different, taken any different paths?
Absolutely not. I love metallurgy, metallurgical engineering, material science, whatever you want to call it. I've had such fun. Materials intrigue me. You know, I look at things. I mean, of course, I see corrosion everywhere, but I look at materials differently from anything that I would have done had I not been in this field. And I find them fascinating, that we can change things so easily, if you know how. You know, just take something like steel, which has been around for centuries, and think about the different properties we can get from that, by alloying, by heat treatment, and so on. It's amazing. And I find great joy in teaching these things or opening people's eyes to what's around them, to what the table is made of, to what their refrigerator is made of, to all of those things. No, I have no regrets. I would like a few more decades of it, but I'm not going to do that, am I?
Oh, well, thank you so very much. This has been fascinating, and you have such a fascinating career and life, and thank you for sharing it with me and sharing it with everyone who will enjoy watching this. It's been a real pleasure to spend this time with you, and thank you for giving it to me and to us. So thanks again, and we really are happy that you've shared your story with AIME.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.